And that's the right time to explain you specific adjustment layers. You already know a few of them, and if you've been into Photoshop, you've probably heard about most of them, but you might know about the difference when we use them, what's the value of specific adjustment layers. So that's what I would like to focus in this lesson. And I mentioned before the basic adjustments, and let's see on the top on our adjustment panel. And first of all is brightness, contrast, levels, curves, and vibe exposure. Okay, for the four first ones. And as I mentioned before, these one are basically contrast and balance between the white areas and black areas, between the highlights and between the darks. First thing I would like to say, brightness, contrast. I'm going to mostly, you probably going to mostly remove this from your work. And if I have to be honest, I'm nearly not using brightness and contrast. This is very basic. I was showing you this as a presentation before because it seems to be very simple. But what you could notice is we absolutely cannot do anything using brightness and contrast. If I have to be honest with you, that's super basic tool, and it exists from one of the earliest version of Photoshop, and maybe that's the reason why it's not so useful. Of course, it is useful if you just have an image and think, I just want to bring up a little bit contrast, or I want to make this just a bit brighten. You can do this. So for such a basic thing, it's okay. However, we can do much more things using other adjustment layers, and we can do also the same things that we can do with brightness and contrast, we can do using different tools. So brightness, contrast, that's the adjustment layer you're not going to use often, if I have to be honest. Other adjustment layer you're not going to use often is exposure, and that's the thing I have to say, the same example as brightness and contrast. There's not many things we can do. We can bring up exposure, we can bring down exposure, we can set up the offset, we can take down the offset, we can set up the gamma as well. And you can notice it's not very useful and there's no reason to explain. But the contrast adjustment layers like levels and curves are something super powerful. And these two adjustment layers is something that you're going to use the most in Photoshop. I guess you heard of it because these two are the most popular adjustment in Photoshop. Not sure which one is most popular, maybe curves. We often can hear about cross-processing, which we do using curves, for example, setting up the contrast, the color balance using levels. But the thing is, what's the difference between these two? So at first, let me explain what is levels about, what is curves about, and then explain you the difference, because there's not much difference. These two are very similar, and many of people using one's levels, one's curves, and some of the people is just using one because they get used to something, and someone can say, oh, I prefer to use levels, and that's totally fine. Other person say, I prefer curves. That's totally fine. But if you want to know the difference, that's the lesson for you. And I'm going to tell you about possibilities, opportunities, different tasks that these two are doing. So I'm going to start with levels. I'm going to open levels, and the first thing you can see the histogram. It's nothing more like just the information that the image contain. That's just a gray histogram. Of course, if we change into red, we will have red histogram, green histogram, so different colors, different histogram. RGB is general histogram for the image. And what we can see about the levels is, as before, maybe you noticed such a thing, we have black slider on the left side, we have gray slider on the middle, and we have white slider on the right side. So let's go like this. Black slider is the black color. Gray slider, the middle one, is our midtone. So it's the gray parts of the image. White slider are our whites. So using these three sliders, we can set up the contrast by changing the range between these all. If we make the range smaller, the contrast will be a bit stronger. Also, we can set up the balance between the white areas and the dark areas. We can set up the contrast. As you can see, when I'm pulling to the left side, the middle slider, this image is losing the contrast because we're affecting this by the white colors. When I'm pulling this to the right side, it's getting some of the contrast, not so strong, because we make the bigger range for the black color. I'm going to set up 1 once again. And also on the left side, we have these pens. We can call them droppers. We have black one, gray one, and white one. And what it says, we can just pick white one, for example. And what it's going to do, when we're going to hit in some place using this white dropper, it's going to set up these areas as a white ones. So you find the brightest part of the image. I think it will be this shirt. And I'm going to hit over here. And what happened, maybe I'm going to do a step back and hit once again. White dropper, I'm going to hit here. And what happened, this shirt become white because we set up our white color, and also at the same point our histogram is changed. I'm going to choose the black one, which seems to be more suitable. I'm going to find the black part. I think it will be here. So by setting this, we're making this color totally black. We made the shirt totally white before, we made the black colors totally black. Of course, after all, we can set the white one, we can set this white, and the contrast is way stronger because these areas are totally black, these areas are totally white. So that's how it looks like. But let's go back to a bit more precise work. Okay, here you have always auto option. So if you just want to do a quick fix for your image, it's always a good idea to hit auto to have a look how does it looks like. Once again, okay, it was already auto, and as you can see, we changed the values over here a little bit. And what the auto do, it works actually quite well for us because it just cuts off the end points of our histogram because there was nothing actually. So that's a very simple improvement for the image, but auto is not really so common. So if that's just a quick fix, if you just using Photoshop to fix your images, just hit auto to have a look how does it looks like for you, how does it work. So right now I'm going to set up something. I just want to darken some of the dark areas and going to brighten the white areas. So I'm just going to, similar as auto, cut in this area because this one looks suitable. And I'm going to set up the balance between these two colors. Maybe this one too dark, so I'm going to pull this up to this side, and this image looks already a bit better. There's one thing I didn't tell you, but right now that's the right point to do this. We have this range over here from white point, from actually black point on the left to the white point on the right. And what is it doing? I'm just going to hit this, and the black point, simply speaking, going to knock out the black area. So if you think it's too dark, you can knock out this by bringing up the dark range, as you can see. And what does it actually mean? This slider is black, so that's our black point, and the darkest area is dark over here, it's selected. So when we take this to the right side, let's go to this green color, gray color, of course. And right now the darkest point of the image is this gray color. Everything which is darker, that this gray color doesn't exist anymore, because I cut this off. I believe it's all easy to understand for now. And right now let's go to the white slider, and I'm going to drag it to the left side. I'm going to go here. So similar as about the black slider, right now we cut off everything what is brighter than this gray color over here. So this area, this range doesn't exist anymore on this image. So I believe it's very simple if I cut out this from this side, as you can see, only this gray color, actually only these gray tones exist on the image. We don't have dark parts, we don't have white parts. So that's how we use levels. So as you can see, mostly I set up the contrast and the balance between the whites and the darks, and it's super powerful if it's about contrast. So that's why I'm not using brightness contrast, but I'm using levels. Also, we can set up the balance between red colors in the same way. As you can see, the left dark slider is about the opposite colors to the reds, about cold colors. So I'm just pulling this up from the dark areas, because that's always our dark area. And here will be our white, it will be red color, and I'm bringing up the red color. So that's how it works. And for every color, it's the same rule. For red, green, here, as you can see, this green, I need to see, it will be yellowish color, probably. Let's have a look. As you can see, this red magenta color, which is opposite to green, from this side for the lights will be green color. So that's how it works. And that's actually all of the use that I'm using the levels for setting up the contrast, sometimes to manipulate a little bit the colors. Some people are actually doing this. What I'm using levels is setting up the contrasts. So we understood the levels, or at least in the small part we understood the levels, because if you haven't used this, still it might be a bit confusing, but once you start working with Photoshop, you're going to use levels for a few of your project, you're going to see exactly how does it work, and you become fluent. That's the way we have to walk through when we're exploring things. So the other thing is curves. And what about curves? It might work very similar to levels. I'm going to open levels once again, and I'm going to set this up at the zeros. And curves works very similar. We have once again the histogram, which you can notice looks very similar to this one. Here's cuts off, and we have this shape. Have a look. Because it's exactly the same image. There's nothing changed. We have histogram, and the same as with levels, we have black slider over here, white slider over here. We can move them. As you can see, when we grab this, I'm going to grab black one, and I'm going to make this image darken. When I want to make this image brighten, I'm going to grab over here. So that's a very simple use of this. That's how we're doing this. So we could say, oh, it just works the same as levels. Also, we can go this side. So as you can see, we're going to brighten up the black color. We're knocking down the black color, of course, going this side, and we're knocking down the white color going this side. So you can see it has actually the same possibilities as levels, and that's why I think it's more, maybe not more user-friendly, because I think levels is a bit easier for beginners to use, but it's for sure it's way better for the creative use. So it's way better if you think about future work in Photoshop, because the thing you do in levels you can pretty much do in curves, at least nearly all of them. However, the things you do in curves you cannot do in levels, and I'm going to show you this. So right now we can see, okay, levels and curves works the same because of these sliders. And of course we can manipulate this every way. So what's so special about curves that it gives you more possibilities? You see, this line is straight right now, and the same as in camera raw, we can manipulate this over different way, because this curve can be manipulated as many times as we need. We can drag it down here, drag it up here, drag it down once again here, so we can create tons of the shapes. Of course it looks just weird right now, but you can see how many possibilities you have using curves. They are just endless about your colors, about the balance between whites and blacks, and not only about all of the colors. The possibilities in curves are endless. often when I want to brighten up the image, as we were using brightness, I'm just pulling up the curve, and that's how I brighten up the image. If I want to darken the image, I'm just pulling down the curve to darken up the image. So that's very basic use. And of course, if I want to set up the contrast, I can do like this. And also I can use the curve function, so I just can make it curve and set up the contrast this way. For some abstract images, of course, I can do everything my mind wants. Also, I find this way more easier if it's about cross-processing. We can use any color, and I love to use curve for cross-processing because it's giving you really amazing results. You can see this is just use that you could get by using levels. However, we can use curve for a bit more specific colors, for a bit more specific effects, and this thing I achieve over here would be really difficult to achieve by curves. So as you can see, possibilities of curves are really endless because you can work any possible way. And only one thing I'm not really using curves often is when I just want to set up the contrast. I really like to set up the contrast using levels, even if I'm not using levels for anything else. However, this thing we can also do using curves. Also, the thing I mentioned before about levels, we can often try option auto to set up the option auto, and as you can see, we're going to get something like this. And in this case, I really like the auto I got. Just going to work with the blue color once again because I really like this effect I got before. Just something like this. And the other thing about adjustment layers, I said before, if you think the effect is too strong, you can always change the opacity to get the really desired look you really want. So that would be all about curves and levels, which are super powerful if it's about cross-processing and contrasts. What I could recommend you at the end, you can always open adjustment layers and experiment to see how exactly does it work, because it's once again about natural feeling. I can give you the knowledge, I can give you theory and see how does it look in practice, but you need to get comfortable with this. Also, I always recommend you to see the presets. Every adjustment layer has some presets, and we can always choose the presets to see how does it looks like. For example, we have presets like lighter, and that's the thing I was doing. So when I'm brightening up the image, I'm just pulling this up. It's just a little bit lighter. We can set up the negative. So as you can see, the curve works in really amazing way. Of course, all of this, which is in presets, you can achieve by your own work. The presets are just to help, so if you need to brighten, you can always check, but I don't really think that presets are common in use. As you can see, by using curves, we can really get abstract images. So I'm going to go back to default, and yeah, curves, you can do everything you really want. So that's all about this lesson. Of course, if you have any questions, if you're still having any difficulties about understanding these two and differences between two, just leave a comment and we're going to resolve all of your doubts about curves and levels.